LBR LBO Brand Summit 2017.
Right, now we'll jump right in. So we've heard content is king, content is a trucker, content is Donald Trump, it's Brexit, it's what have you. And there was a Google survey done among small business owners, and they found that 79% of small business owners said that they used content marketing. Interestingly, 1 in 5 of them admitted they didn't quite know what content marketing was. So I'll start with you, Jonathan. What is it? What is it?
What indeed? I think, broadly speaking, content marketing is like advertising, but not. In my view, it's almost an aggregate of lots of small pieces of messaging, small ideas and pieces of information, viewpoints, clips of film, small pieces put together either by the social groups themselves or by the business or by whomever. And they kind of come together and are corralled and organized in such a way as to create an impression or to build a greater sense of brand loyalty amongst the people who are reading it. So it is a sort of a fruit salad of lots of small pieces that's primary objective is to change the way that people feel about a particular brand or message or campaign or thrust of intent. And those elements, if you like, come together to create content marketing. So it's not actually any one big campaign driven through multiple channels. It's actually an impression created out of multiple small parts, all of which are kind of directed towards a bigger ambition. So I think that's probably what content marketing is.
There's, Kamal, just moving on to you. I find that maybe some of the best content feels very editorial. You know how BuzzFeed does really interesting content. It feels organic, it feels authentic. For you, what do you think some of the guiding principles of creating really great content is?
Thank you. So to me, it depends on the medium you want to really push your content on. So for example, if it's Twitter, it has to be 140. And when it gets to like listicles, so you got to create like a long form content. And similarly, when it comes to YouTube, so again, videos need to be like within that 1.5 to 2 minute kind of a scenario. So yeah, depending on the medium is how packaging should be done, and brands should look forward in that context.
Right. So because we've seen, Navanal, we saw with you, there's emotion, there's information, there's aspiration, there's a lot of identity in terms of what we saw with Santosh's presentation. Do you want to just expand on that? How important is it to really tap into these things, and how does that get leveraged to create really wonderful, impactful content?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at content, I look at it very simply as information can be broadly bucketed into 2 areas. Is it useful or is it entertaining? It almost goes back to literature. Literature for literature's sake or art for art's sake versus art for life's sake. It's the same. I mean, nothing's changed actually. You use different monikers and different terms, and it's the same. And it's still true about content. So is the information useful or is the information entertaining? I mean, and useful can be in many parts of life. I mean, does it help me do something? Does it help me learn something? Does it help me get a better deal? All of things, because finally it's for life. I mean, brands have to play a role in people's life. So either that or even entertaining me is a task. It's a great task, and it's not a very easy task. I mean, and to me, if you look at it, that either am I being useful or am I being entertaining? Ideally both. And if you can ideally be both, then there's nothing like it. I would say that's the winning mantra for content, which is both useful and entertaining.
It was also the winning mantra for TV and continues to be. This, Irene, moving on. We've talked about TV a lot, and especially in the previous panel. with TV, we try and cast a wider net. You know, we take an aggregate of how people feel. It's all about the volume almost. With social media and all of the data that's available to us, we have this wonderful opportunity to micro-segment, to continue to nano-segment after that. How important is it to leverage that?
If I actually look at content today, and the reason why content is king is because it's democratic. Anybody sitting in any part of the world can create content and become popular. There's a lady in Malaysia, not a lady, a girl, called Coco. She trends more than anybody else, more than even the corruption issues in a country like Malaysia, because she just talks rubbish. She just keeps people entertained. She clicks pictures of her rich husband having bought her an LV bag, shows people her house, shows them face without makeup. That's it. So at the end of the day, when you're looking at, is there a formula like there used to exist at one point in time when we used to ask marketers or clients, who is your core TG? Today, your core TG is splintered across. And therefore, it becomes even more critical to have content which is diverse in nature. Exactly as what I was talking about in terms of Magnum. There might be some people who are just very happy just seeing the ad. There are some people who probably want a brand to do something more. So there is no one size that fits all, but I think it's about being able to take a central brand idea and fragment it across different media.
Great. If we move on to, say, a small business versus big business, we've spoken about the Unilevers and the P&Gs of this world, versus smaller, say, a yoga studio, a restaurant, what have you. Sometimes, do you think perhaps that because authenticity sits at the key and at the heart of what makes really interesting content, do you feel that one or the other has it easier? That a larger business perhaps that has many more layers, many more stakeholders, would find it harder to tap into authenticity versus, say, a coffee store, where the owner is really the driving force behind the whole project, and it's passion that comes through. Talk us through that.
So at the end, I think it boils down to appetite, and I think Kamal was talking about it in the previous session as well, where the ability to take a risk needs to be there in the marketer. And I think we've always spoken to all our clients and said gut. Gut is at the end of the day the most important thing. You can test ads till the cows come home, and trust me, advertising will always get bashed up by research. I'm sorry. But the fact remains that there is a certain conviction that you need to have. And smaller brands make it, probably because they have so much less to lose, they've come in with a startup mentality. They experiment much more. So it took a lot of the big brands in a market like Indonesia to look at the hijab-wearing woman and then tell her that, oh my God, yes, Indonesia is going on the map. A smaller brand called Vardha is giving everybody a run for their money. They took the hijabista and they put it in the Paris and the New York Fashion Week. So it was about taking Indonesia to New York and not bringing New York to Indonesia. So the conviction and the guts to go ahead and experiment probably is higher with a startup because there's nothing to lose.
Santosh, do you find that working here, working with our clients, that there is an appetite for risk when it comes to trying new things, experimenting, not perhaps having a pre-test and a post-test available to you all the time if you want to be timely?
Sure. Before I answer that question, I had a question for Navanil, which is, how can a condom brand be called Dipper and still do well? I don't quite get that. He probably can answer that later. But yeah, I think coming back to your question, Alina, I think there are a lot of young people in marketing in Sri Lanka now. And many of them who are avid Facebookers, avid guys who are on Twitter, are more understanding and more appreciative of the need to start investing and trying to do stuff on social media than some of probably the brand owners. And I do think that is something that will take some time, because a lot of the brand owners themselves are not very avid social media, people who are on social media themselves, and therefore tend to look at it as being a fairly risky venture for a couple of reasons. One is, I think there is a reluctance to subject ourselves to anything that might invite negative comments. And that in itself becomes a huge barrier. Because fact of the matter is that when you're in social media, you will get all kinds of comments. There will be comments which are positive, and there will be some conversations which are not very easy conversations to have. And I think a general tendency, I think it's a tendency amongst all marketers, not necessarily in Sri Lanka, but I would suspect that that over here the tendency does amongst an older segment tend to be a little conservative and, oh, let's not go into spaces where we are not sure what to do. Or, oh, I have only 100,000 Sri Lankan rupees. Why don't we do a viral film that goes viral and gets me lots of... So, it's more a cost-driven decision sometimes to be on social media rather than a strategy-driven decision saying, hey, social media is a space I want to be in. I know the risks involved with it. There could be some negativity. But people who know the stuff, the younger guys who are into it, let's empower them to go there and do what needs to be done. I think there is probably a gap in that space.
So do you think, for instance, did you want to add to that?
I'm saying it's probably this mindset that needs to change.
Yeah.
It has to be driven more from what the consumer wants and where he is, rather than, we should be doing this, we should be doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because also we tend to sometimes get into digital as, the support medium, the cheap medium. I think we need to really shift out of that. It's not, you don't get into it because it's cheap at the moment or not or whatever. Does anybody want to expand on that? Santosh or Kamal, just go for it.
So I wouldn't call it like a cheap medium. It depends on the kind of product you need to create. So if it's like a mobile app, obviously it turns out to be very expensive. And if it's a media campaign, all the more expensive. You need to kind of go whole hog. So again, it's that thought which needs a change. Don't think about a medium as being expensive, very expensive or less expensive. If your audience is out there, you need to be there. And if your audience is not there, you don't need to be there. So that's the kind of thought process a brand and a marketer should really go through.
Do you still get briefs that say, make me a viral film?
I've stopped accepting those briefs.
So, but taking over from there, we get briefs like that. All of us, all the time. But what for the pieces of content that you love personally, that have been worldwide hits even, what do you think is the key ingredient? What is that, is there a magic component to what makes something more resonant or go viral or get your 300 million likes or whatever it is?
So audiovisual works better when it comes to creating content. I see that getting a lot of views and likes and shares when it comes to pure play, like reading about like a blog or something. So to me, again, I would like create an audiovisual for a client who really needs it, and I would probably put a blog out there for a client who really needs it. So it depends on the audience. We should start with keeping the end person in mind and then create content backwards. So for example, if it's a tourism industry, people tend to read a lot about really going out there and then making a decision about a place. So they read through blogs, they go through a number of sites. So hence you need to be there if you're a tourism client. And when it comes to like entertainment, so if it's hangama.com, so they are in the business of entertainment. So we create like audio visuals for them, which is easily consumable from an end perspective. So that's how I look at it.
So I've spent all this time and all the effort creating this wonderful piece of content, say. It doesn't necessarily mean that my audience is going to come looking for it, right? When it comes to trying to broadly understand how to divide investment between, say, creating the piece of content and actually distributing it, is there a broad principle? Is one more important than the other? Navanil, do you want to take that? No?
Honestly, I would not be the best
Somebody
person
else?
to answer. Yeah, on distribution, yeah. More about the creative part.
Is there any insight you might have?
So I'll go back to your previous question, the cost of sounding absolutely challenging to a lot of advertisers or ad agencies that are here in this room. While we've been saying that marketing and marketing guys probably don't want to take that risk, I, in my personal experience, have seen a lot of ad agencies, a lot of creative people don't want to take a risk. So when you go back and you tell them there is a left behind generation in China, which is a large proportion of young girls who, because of the gender ratio in China, will never get married, and they're actually called the left behind generation, nobody wants to touch them. We can't be getting into those kind of spaces. It's very sensitive, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm an ice cream brand. And it took another ice cream brand to go ahead and do that and sell love to them. So I don't know what distribution works and how it needs to be dispersed, but what I can tell you is there needs to be a certain putting human stories and human interests first before thinking of devices or media or even content.
It's a great one. So to move on, we've talked about marketing potentially being or not dead. We've talked a lot, and we're living through advertising changing, and it's changing at such a fierce pace. Jonathan, do you think that it's skilling up differently where agencies and clients are concerned, or do you think that we need to first maybe reinvent processes before we try and understand what new skills we need in place?
I think broadly speaking, we need to be hiring the right people to do the right jobs at the right time. But as those jobs and their needs they're very fluid, they're hard to determine right at the outset. It's very hard to staff up for the people that we think would be able to really drive and execute strong social media or digital or traditional advertising campaigns. So I think if there's a change of processes, if there's a way of looking at the development process, as I touched on this morning, then that, if you like, creates the job descriptions for the people that need to participate in it. And it's all very well having processes and new ways of looking at things. It very often means that you need to hire a slightly different kind of person to plug into that and bring their expertise in order for the process to be solid and be successful and be sustainable. So I think the change in the headcount or the personnel or the caliber of people working in marketing is going to be driven as much as anything by the tasks and the tools they then need to engage with. And it's very likely that as everything changes, a number of people in the room are not going to be perhaps skilled in the challenges that they need to fulfill in future. So yes, there's either going to be some upskilling, or there's going to be some change skilling, or there's going to be some changing out to bring in the right people to do the right things for the new processes that the market would seem to need. So yes, I think it is an HR issue as much as anything. Exactly what and to what extent and how many will be determined by the challenge. But yes, I don't think it can be HR business as usual, but a whole new way of doing things. There's going to be some gaps, and those gaps need to be managed, and that's going to be painful for some and thrilling for others.
Yeah, let's take some questions. I think I saw one that might have disappeared. Santosh, do you want to take that one about whether brands should take a political stance? Should they take a social stance? What is a potential challenge there?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that there are enough examples in the recent past where brands have taken on social issues of concern and made a difference. And that probably is something which, is an opportunity for us in Sri Lanka. I'm not so sure about political messaging because I can't think of any positive example of any brand which has taken on political messaging and had an impact in terms of brand equity over a long-term period. It may have been a, on the spur kind of a reflection or a reaction to a political event, because politics is a completely different kettle of fish altogether. But I think if the purpose of the brand is to bring social change, addressing some of the social concerns and social issues are probably the way for brands to go in the future. And there are successful case studies like Touch the Pickle and there's Share the Load, which I just shared. And there are some elements like Wix, what Wix did recently, what Lifebuoy has been doing, consistently. There are some examples where brands have got into social messaging and actually created more engagement, created more relevance for themselves, and created better responses from their consumers and their constituents to the brands. So.
I noticed another question earlier. Kamal, maybe you want to take this. What is the difference between content marketing and, say, PR versus native advertising? Are these all just terms? Or are they all a part of the same thing?
I mean, I see them being linked, actually. So yeah, I mean, PR also gets into content marketing these days. It's not about just putting a press release out there. They really think about, how that whole piece of content should be going out to the audience. So hence, some amount of content marketing has a play there. Same goes with native advertising, where, I mean, you've seen the Share the Load campaign of how they've taken like a traditional bit, getting into like other pieces of content on digital, break it up into further pieces on ground. So it's all linked. I mean, there's nothing which is like one solution for all. But yeah, I mean, it's multiple solutions, like she said. I mean, fragmentation is what is really people should look into.
Great. So take it on. Yeah.
I think there's a question there where someone's asking about ROI for the aerial activity. And I must say that actually this campaign for aerial, the reason why I presented it is not only because of the fact that it won so many awards and got a recognition as being the #1 global campaign for 2016, but because of the fact that on the 3 objectives that were set, one was to increase unaided brand awareness, second was to actually increase intention to purchase, and the third was to increase value share in terms of actual sales. On all of the 3 objectives, the objectives were met, and it went beyond the objectives. So obviously there are issues because of the client-agency relationship in terms of sharing specific numbers in terms of data, but I can assure you that all of these 3 objectives which were set were more than fulfilled, which is why the campaign was succeeded so well in some of the FE awards, just for the person who asked the question related to the ROI.
Irene, did you want to take the second one?
Yeah. Actually, a question that's been repeated over and over again, and I don't want to sound like a human activist, I'm not, but at the end of the day, there are questions that are being asked saying advertising is boring. Is it the marketer's fault? Is it the advertiser's fault? Is it the advertising agency's fault? I think it's important to put the human stance into it, or the human lens into it, or human context into it. If you have a great idea, I think there are very few people in the world who will look at something as inspiring as some of the examples that you've seen, if it was at a storyboard or at an idea stage and say, yeah, this is rubbish, no, who wants to do loads? There might be some people who do. But if you have the conviction to push your idea through and be stubborn, and that comes down to Jonathan's point about recruiting those kind of people who will not let go, who will just push that idea even if it means that they probably get sidelined, but have the conviction to do that. The other question that I'm sure is not popping up but should pop up in your minds is, as marketers, how do I replicate this? It's all great to see brilliant case studies in advertising and say, wow, oh my God, they did it, Ariel did it, this one did it, Lifebuoy did it. How do I replicate it? So we have a very simple rule of thumb. Talk to the consumers. Do not talk to the consumers in a laboratory or an antiseptic kind of a context. Talk to the consumer like you would talk to anybody else in life, like you would talk to a Uber driver and how you would strike a conversation. Secondly, look out for language. So your point of Neil's point on battery. As a kid, I remembered everybody teasing people who had spectacles called battery. Some were called double battery and some were called soda bottle. Look out for nuances which you take for granted in your language, in your culture. And thirdly, there's a huge power in co-creation. When you think you can't, you don't have the answers, reach out. There are people out there. There are consumers who will be willing to talk to you and you'll find the answer.
I'm going to say something slightly controversial, so Lakshman, you need to pardon me if it's too controversial. But I think, I get asked this question, which was asked out there, saying, why is Sri Lankan advertising so boring versus Indian advertising being so exciting? And I keep answering this in this way, which is, I think when the revolution happened in India, it was a partnership between the client and the agency. Let's face it, India as a country in terms of many demographic numbers, quality of life, living indices, literacy is far, far inferior to Sri Lanka, if you really look at the numbers. But the fundamental belief that seems to exist in Sri Lanka when it comes to communication is, oh, you know what, we need to be direct, we need to be straight. They won't get it. You don't know Sri Lanka. Sri Lankans, we don't get anything which is slightly complex. I think that mistake is one thing which actually holds this thing back a lot. And I think as long as clients continue to believe that Sri Lankans can't get messaging which is a little bit evolved, it's going to be a struggle to take the communication to the next level. I genuinely believe that. I'm also saying one more thing, which is that the reason it happened in India is because clients took the call along with agencies, in partnership with the agencies, to actually go out there and do something which actually changes the way advertising works. That's a singular, direct, honest point which I thought I will just say up front.
No, and I want to add to that. And to this, I think we need to give credit to our friends at Low and Unilever. If you look at some of the new work coming out, especially for brands like Sunlight, the last Sunlight film that came on, it really takes that leap. And I think with, just to echo what you've said, when you have brave clients and brave agencies going into something in a partnership, then that is when you will see the change occurring. And then we have proof of it in terms of the work that we've seen. Lakshman, are we done? Is that your sign for wrap it up? Huh? Is there anyone who wants to take any of the other questions? Is there a final piece of advice? Because I think in this room there are lots of people who haven't dipped their toes in the pool yet. Is there a bit of advice for someone who's saying, okay, I'm going to embark on this, or I'm going to try something? Is there some base advice?
I think
in addition to everything else we've got already.
So one piece of advice for marketers would be to get clients on board and make them be a part of the process. So a question which was kind of out there, like, how to change that mindset, old school, etc. So if they are a part of your process, thinking, ideation, and they have that bit in them about, like, let's go out and try it, I'm sure things would be much easier for them. So yeah, this is my advice to them.
Following on from that, I think that involving clients in that sort of co-partnership role is actually very, very powerful. Primarily because it gives them power of authorship, and they feel a sense of ownership of the creative process or the ideas that come out. And almost for to see yourself as a sort of midwife in the process rather than the owner of it is quite important, because then you can transfer the ownership to the client group, who then will fight the battle internally, and they'll put their own names to a piece of initiative because they've been part of that creative process. And there is that ownership, which is very, very powerful for the sustainable long-term development of the brand and the brand idea, because ultimately they'll sort of think, well, it was our idea, we thought of it. And then that will run and run and run, and it will have currency within the organization and value that goes on for a lot longer than just fighting over something and then ramming it down and then printing it or developing it and releasing it, and nobody loves it, and it becomes a thankless task. So developing a sense of co-ownership, I think, is very, very important. That and a sense of humor and a really thick skin.
So in my organization, when we decided to go digital, it wasn't easy. We're traditional boring researchers. The only thing that I remember very clearly was the boss saying, The easiest day was yesterday. And there's no way of walking away from it. You can try and dip your toes in the pool, you'll never learn swimming. If you don't jump in, you're going to drown very soon and somebody else will be pushing you in.
Yeah, I mean, two things which I want to talk about. One, from the client point of view, how do you get them? I think you need to share. From an agency point of view, share examples with clients. Not in these kind of conferences where everything is being shared in a general en masse. Things which are relevant in their categories, in allied categories, in relative categories, in different countries, share them. Not that the first day you share, they will, at least it'll set them thinking. Remember with clients, it's a process of gradual progress. It will not happen overnight. Try relationships with your wife, husband, it's all the same. Nothing happens overnight. So that's one part of it, that I think sharing, that gives them the confidence that yes, other people, other brands have done it and got it right and it's worked for them. So that's one key thing. The other thing I feel, is a slightly larger point. Advertising, if you look at communication, there's one kind of advertising where advertising was in its early days, which is all about functional advertising, which is all about payoff-led advertising. Whiter, brighter, fresher, smarter, stronger, faster. Depends on the category, depends on the brand. But in today's age where everybody is fresher, whiter, brighter, smoother, or all of that, where there is literally no unique selling proposition, where there's no literal competitive advantage at a product level, where there is really product parity, what is becoming important is to become from a consumer point of view, it's to feel like it's my kind of brand, that this brand seems like me. Both brands, A, B, and all brands deliver the same. But brand A seems my kind of brand. And to create that my kind of brand, you need to do these kind of things. If Nike is your brand, then inspiration is your space. If something else is your brand, maybe humor may be your space. But use those and come across as my kind of brand. And content advertising and communication like this helps you be that. Yeah?
I have no advice as such, but I just have a thought, which is that at the end of this exercise, we've all spent a full day here. What are we taking out of these sessions? Are we going to go back and say, I liked Navanil's presentation, or I liked somebody else's presentation? Or can we actually set some aggressive goals for ourselves? Can we say this is the year 2017 where we in Sri Lanka are going to create something which the world's going to take notice? Is it going to be a piece of viral communication that's been done? Is it going to be the year when Sri Lanka wins the first ever gold lion at Cannes? I don't know. But I think at the end of the day, if all of us actually go out there and say, this is one thing I'm going to do this year, it can actually make a big difference. And that's basically my thought.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lakshman.